Plot, when you're talking about a novel, or even a movie, is basically just the things that happen from beginning to end. And so these are the different parts of the plot. And first we start with exposition. Exposition is the very beginning of the story, and it gives you the important background information, including the characters, who they are, their names, their relationships, and the setting. This is an example using Snow White and the Huntsman. So here's the exposition. Snow White was orphaned at a young age because her stepmother murdered her father. Her stepmother is a vain woman that worships a mirror. So we get some background on what's going on with their relationship and who they are. Next is the rising action. That's a series of incidents beginning with a conflict that creates suspense, interest, and tension in a story. An example, the mirror tells the queen that she is no longer the fairest of them all because Snow White has become of age to claim that title. The queen sends a huntsman to kill her. The huntsman does not kill her. Instead, he protects her. Climax is the most exciting part of the story. It's the turning point of the action in the story. So things will be going along in a certain direction, and we get to the climax. So the queen has failed in attempting to kill Snow White several times. She takes matters into her own hands and poisons her with a deadly apple. Shortly after her funeral, she is awakened by a kiss from the huntsman. She then forms an army to rebel against her stepmother. The following action, the events following the climax of the work that moves it towards its denouement or resolution. Those mean the same thing. Snow White leads an army of her faithful followers to battle against the queen in her castle. The resolution is a sorting out or unraveling of a plot at the end of a story. It's the conclusion of the story. Snow White defeats her evil stepmother and takes her rightful place as queen in her father's kingdom. So in this case, it's a happily ever after. So here's a chance for you to think about these different parts. This is sort of a review about what the exposition is, the rising action, climax, falling action, resolution, all parts of the plot.
The brothers reached a river too treacherous to pass. But being learned in the magical arts, the three brothers simply waved their wands and made a bridge. Before they could cross, however, they found their path blocked by a hooded figure. It was Death, and he felt cheated. Cheated because travellers would normally drown in the river, but Death was cunning. He pretended to congratulate the three brothers on their magic, and said that each had earned a prize for having been clever enough to evade him. The oldest asked for a wand more powerful than any in existence, so Death fashioned him one from an elder tree that stood nearby. The second brother decided he wanted to humiliate Death even further, and asked for the power to recall loved ones from the grave. So Death plucked a stone from the river and offered it to him. Finally, Death turned to the third brother. A humble man, he asked for something that would allow him to go forth from that place without being followed by Death. And so it was that Death reluctantly handed over his own cloak of invisibility. The first brother travelled to a distant village, where with the elder wand in hand, he killed a wizard with whom he had once quarrelled. Drunk with the power that the Elder Wand had given him, he bragged of his invincibility. But that night, another wizard stole the wand and slit the brother's throat for good measure. And so Death took the first brother for his own. The second brother journeyed to his home, where he took the stone and turned it thrice in hand. To his delight, the girl he'd once hoped to marry before her untimely death appeared before him. Yet soon she turned sad and cold, for she did not belong in the mortal world. Driven mad with hopeless longing, the second brother killed himself so as to join her. And so Death took the second brother. As for the third brother, Death searched for many years but was never able to find him. Only when he attained a great age did the youngest brother shed the cloak of invisibility and give it to his son. He then greeted Death as an old friend and went with him gladly, departing this life as equals.
So this walks you through the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution of that story. The exposition is that the three wizard brothers came across a bridge and they were unable to pass, so they used magic to reconstruct a bridge. Then Death appears and feels cheated by them. I guess he thought they were going to die at this scary place. The rising action. Death rewards them for outsmarting him. The oldest brother receives the most powerful wand in existence. The second brother receives a resurrection stone that can bring people back to life. The third brother asks for an invisibility cloak. The two older brothers begin to use their rewards for immoral reasons. The two older brothers' gifts transform into curses that lead to their deaths. That's the climax, the most exciting part. The falling action is when we learn that he could never find the third brother, and even though he tried to claim him. And the resolution is that he grew old and was ready to die, so he gives up his cloak, gives it to his son, and dies from old age rather than from greed and selfishness. Fairy tales are a great way to try to follow the plot. Usually they are pretty easy to follow. They almost always end with happily ever after, though.